Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered How to Edit Seals Part 12. If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
It had been a half day since the rough roads smoothed out to the point where bumps were just a minor annoyance. When he felt the change from dirt road to paved road, he knew the trip was almost over. A quick look out the window, which made the wolf closest to the carriage on that side look worried, showed that they had, in fact, reached the far edge of the capital city. And he meant it when he said, far outskirts. In fact, they were so far away that there was no city yet. Instead, there were concrete bases and plots marked by metal poles with flags tied to them. Being one of the most financially stable, Hyuga was always growing. Knowing this, the Imperial Fire Court decided to get a head start on building for the future and started getting 10 new sections ready at once. Each section was separated by the beginnings of a wall on either side of the road, which met in the middle to form two large, empty gates. On both sides of the road, banners were also hung on these gates. The light wind in Fire Country made the red fabric move slowly, but the solid black emblem of Hyuga was still very visible. Of course, that symbol was a ball of fire, and the way the banners moved made it look like it was burning. Whether it was the goal or not, it helped the city's reputation, which had been hurt by the preparations. But it was useful, and that was much more important. He had to take his finger off the dark red fabric that hung over his window before one of his wolves filled the window with wooden boards to keep him safe, but he already knew what to expect when he got to the capital of Hyuga. He had learned all about it in school in Konoha, where he had grown up. The Shinobi Academy taught the most, including everything from how the sewers worked to where the servant stairs were in the daimyo's bedroom. This was done for two reasons. The first was that if the capital was attacked, the shinobi of Konohagakure could be sent quickly to help the samurai armies and get the important people out of the city, like the members of the Imperial Fire Court in the top two tiers. The other, less well-known reason was in case they ever went against the daimyo and had to attack the capital on their own. Shinobi didn't usually talk about that reason, though, because most people thought that the Imperial Fire Court and the daimyo would look down on it. Which made sense, since if that was the case, they would be the targets. It didn't seem like there were many people who liked being attacked by shinobi. It's not surprising that most of them were shinobi who wanted to fight. He was sure that the daimyo didn't belong to either of those groups. But if he was, Naruto, like every other student who graduated from the academy and some who didn't, was ready to save the day. The main road he was on, whose main gate faced south to avoid the rising and setting sun for symbolic reasons he didn't care about at the time, was black and smooth all the way from the daimyo's palace to the edge of the newest part of the city that had been built. After a single street on either side, that same pavement would end and usually turn back into cut blocks. Those paved roads usually looked different depending on what part of the city you were in. Some roads were made of normal bricks, while others were made of gray shapes arranged in strange ways, and still others were made to look like pictures. Gravel covered the ground in poorer areas and sometimes in those of the rich and paranoid as well. Areas with government buildings were usually covered in smooth concrete that was well taken care of by people who worked for the city. In the end, it wasn't uniform or beautiful, but it was bright and alive, like fire. It was also easy to know where you were because even though similar neighborhoods had the same features, there was always something different that set them apart. He knew that the roofs were all made of red or, in the case of the light gray government buildings, orange tiles, and that they worked with other buildings to make a rather unique drainage system. This system took advantage of the overlapping roofs and different angles to keep as much of the summer rainwater away from the streets as possible to make the tunnels that ran under the roads less stressed. Only the capital of Mizu no Kuni did a better job of managing water in the city, but it was still impressive work because it wasn't as important as it was in the land of water. It also meant that any shinobi who had been trained could easily move around the city without touching the ground. It was like a highway compared to the roads on the roofs of Konohagakure, which were probably an attempt to avoid this situation that only partially worked. There were no shinobi patrols up there to stop anyone from using it, so a thief or assassin who used it was bound to fall in love. The Imperial Fire Court probably knew this, so they chose to live in the second tier of the city, which was a little higher and had a better wall and was always watched by samurai and the occasional guardian. The first tier, which was where the daimyo's palace was pretty much the same, but a lot bigger. It was likely the only reason the daimyo still lived in a city where assassins could get to them so easily. Since they were on the first level, They would have to go through a lot of gates to get to the palace. If she remembered right, the last count of tiers was somewhere around 12, and there was talk that a 13th would soon be added. Each tier got bigger, so they still had a long way to go before he could talk to the daimyo. The width of the 7th tier was the same as the diameter of Konoha. That was, of course, if he could get people to listen to him. He could feel the carriage slow down a lot. Since they had stopped to rest a few hours ago, he knew the €4. There were 2 in the first wave, so where did they find the other 2? The horses couldn't be that tired, so they must be getting close to the last gate of Hai no Kuni's capital. A second quick look, which only lasted a second, showed that he was right. It also let him see the different construction crews working on the edges to build another tier. He thought the daimyo should just build a new city nearby, but since it was his land and money, he could do whatever he wanted with them. Even though he only looked out the window for a few seconds, he could feel at least one wolf's gaze through the wood of his carriage. He liked that they cared about him and his well-being, but he thought they were taking things a little too seriously. When the carriage finally stopped, he thought it might be a good idea to close the curtains so the gate guards could take a quick look inside, but he decided to let the wolves take care of it instead. When one of the drivers said that they had just taken over a country and would like to talk to the daimyo as soon as possible, Naruto had a little bit of second thoughts. He could hear one guard muttering and another guard laughing, and he wondered if they would even get into the city. Eventually, the laughing stopped, and he heard the sound of a hand on the shoulder of the first guard. If he had to guess, that was a hand on the shoulder of the second guard. This sound made its way through the dark wood of his carriage. Okay, then. Let's send a message to the daimyo and see what he wants us to do. He still had a faint laugh in his voice, and it was clear that he was amused. Until we hear back from them, I'd like you to go over there. Naruto could only guess where he was pointing, and just hang on. After a moment of silence, he asked, "Who should I have told to tell me they were at the gate?" "Our lord, Tsukiyomi-sama, is accompanied by the wolves. I'll make sure he knows. Do you have anything to drink?" The first guard sputtered in disbelief again. Naruto thought the wolf was shaking his head because the second guard kept going. "Do what you want with this, it shouldn't take more than an hour." With that, he heard 2 steps walking away, or rather, 1 step walking and the other half dragged, and the carriage pulled off to the side of the road by the guardhouse. After hearing that, he had to wonder if the daimyo would even let them into the city, let alone in his presence. He wished, not for the first time, that Mai had come with him on this trip. Even after an hour, Naruto was still shaking his head. It took 20 minutes for the daimyo to tell them, and he cleared his schedule right away to meet with them. Even though his wolf had said that they had just taken over a country, which would mean that they had killed another daimyo, they would be allowed to be in his presence. In fact, Naruto thought that they were let in so quickly because the wolf had said something like that. The daimyo must have become interested. He had heard that the man was a little strange, but this was different. He didn't think the daimyo was stupid, but the man had an army inside his walls that would tear them to pieces if they didn't follow orders. Even though he wasn't as careful as he could have been, he was still in a good place and couldn't be blamed for wanting to meet someone who said they'd taken over a country. Usually, news like that spreads quickly, so the fact that he didn't know about a change in ownership must have been interesting enough for a daimyo who was probably getting bored with running his country. Naruto and his wolves probably gave people a much-needed break. And probably a reason for him to throw out his whole daily schedule. Since Naruto had only dealt with paperwork from a secret organization for a while, he only had a vague idea of what it must have been like, but he knew enough to know that some of the things that had been taken off that day's plans wouldn't be going back on any time soon, if ever. He had definitely done that himself, which made Mai very angry. That doesn't mean he was able to avoid it, though. Like he said, it hadn't won him any points with Mai, and she was happy to find a way to fit it into his busy schedule. He didn't feel bad about giving her most of that work, but he might want to thank her with something like a vacation. A long holiday. A very long break from work. She had Sai and the wolves do as much as they could, but she was still in charge of their relationships with both the Inuzuka and Hinata's small cult. This meant that she had to read reports of council meetings and do a lot of research on Konoha law. Hinata didn't really know what she was supposed to do, so she often asked the older girl what she should do. He thought that the wolves were enough work, and Sai and Mai were a big help back then. He couldn't imagine how much she had to do since she was in charge of all 3. He had to keep in mind that taking her attention away from her work might not be a good idea. He wouldn't be able to think of a way to thank her and later Sai, even though he had an army and, to a certain extent, not that the people knew this, joint control of a country, until they met again. Whenever that happened, of course, since he still didn't have a set plan for this trip, which had probably been going on for far too long, people would start to worry if he didn't come back soon, and he wouldn't be able to leave for a long time after that. Whether he is on a team or not, a boy who lives on his own and works with other shinobi only on rare missions, even if they are only B and C rank, shouldn't be able to take long trips out of the country every few weeks. But maybe the next time he could say it was part of his training to stay alive. Anko would be easy to persuade, especially if he paid her, and he could probably trust her with the information about where he was going and who he was dealing with, which wouldn't seem so bad once the daimyo recognized him, or, more accurately, the wolves. And if things got bad, he could always let her join the group. It wasn't like she hadn't gotten close to him already, and the pack was supposed to be like his family. Considering how much time she spent with him, how often she crashed at his place when she was bored, and how many times they had shared a bed, it didn't seem like a big step to make her a trusted member of his personal army. Oh, that did sound like the best choice. Well, that or a mission near Nami no Kuni. Maybe one of the villagers could ask him to go on a mission personally. No, I'm still not sure, but they could ask Anko. She was known for being hungry for blood and loving explosions, so Naruto was sure he could make a mission just for her. On second thought, he would have to make sure there was a mission to keep her from getting angry. It wasn't a good idea to promise the woman something she liked and then not give it to her. He was happy with the way his balls were. So, getting back to Wave didn't seem to be a problem anymore. All he had to do now was make sure it was still his Wave when he got back. He heard the carriage stop, and he took one last look to make sure they had arrived. He took a quick moment to make sure his scarf and black cloak covered anything that could be used to identify him. Then he went to open the door, but one of his wolves was already there and beat him to it. Taking it all in stride, he got out of the carriage that had been his home for the past 2 weeks. Overall, the courtyard they were in was pretty plain. It was made of tightly packed stone tiles and was empty except for 2 gardens on either side of the walkway. These gardens were gray instead of the burnt orange color of the rest of the courtyard, and they were shaped like crescents that faced outward. In the middles of the crescents, there were more gardens set up in perfect circles around small ponds. There were benches set up so that people could enjoy the front gardens, but he didn't think they were used much. It was too simple and plain for the royal family to care much about it. From what he had heard, the daimyo might be happy with them, but he was too busy for such a luxury when his time was short and his family was probably doing something more important. It was enough to show, though, that the lord did care about how he looked and was willing to make sure that the first thing guests saw was simple, natural elegance. He didn't try to impress you with how rich he was. Instead, he used a big display of something simple to welcome you into his home. It was almost as if he was saying that he didn't need anything fancy to stand out and be better than you. Since he was in charge of the larger country of Hai no Kuni, which had more money than the mountains of Tsuchi no Kuni, was bigger than the deserts of Kase no Kuni, and had deeper coffers than the coasts of Mizu no Kuni, it was kind of obvious. At least he didn't start out bragging about it. That definitely worked in his favor. Sadly, Naruto didn't think that would stay true once he got into the palace proper. Even if the daimyo didn't need the luxury, his family would want it, and the palace was built long before his time and had been filled with beautiful things for many generations. If the lord hadn't taken it all away, which is unlikely because it would be enough to run a small country for hundreds of years, it would still be there in all its overwhelming grandeur. He didn't really expect anything else, though. The plainness of the courtyard was a pleasant and unexpected surprise. He had spent most of 2 weeks in that carriage, only getting out to rest when they had to. He was glad that the first thing he saw when he got out wasn't the huge amount of money the royal family of Hai on Kuni had. You wouldn't be able to tell that he was relieved or that he didn't like what he was going to see in the palace, though, not only because his face was covered, but also because it was kept carefully blank, the picture of professionalism. The wolves would accept him no matter what he did, since he was their leader, but the idea that he, as their representative, might look stupid, even just in front of them, was unthinkable. He always spoke to them as a commander would to his soldiers. Now that he had all that experience, he was putting it to use. He made sure his movements were smooth and controlled, like a predator. He didn't walk with long strides to get closer to the palace. Instead, he stalked in the direction of the palace with the unstoppable goal of the Shinigami coming to get a favored soul. Even though he was small, the palace guards were surprised by how much authority and power he seemed to have. They were so unprepared that they were stunned for a moment. By the time they came to and remembered what they were supposed to be doing as palace guards for the daimyo, Naruto was almost at the doors. 2 wolves were on either side of him. He didn't know who they were, but he could tell from the corner of his eye that they were females. His cloak fluttered behind him to protect him. He stopped in front of the door, and the black fabric wrapped around him in a warm embrace that made his face look even darker. The guards were spoken to rudely, but there was a hint of disdain in the tone that made it clear that they were not important. That wasn't really strange for them, since they had been dealing with the lords and ladies of the Imperial Fire Court for years. What was new, though, was how dangerous this new guest seemed. He was short a euro, so short that it was almost funny to see him up close a euro, but the way he stood and the way his guards stood showed that he wasn't to be underestimated. "Our lord is waiting for me, so get out of my way so I can see him." The other lords were also impatient, but he wasn't like them in how he talked to the daimyo. The other lords always spoke of the man with respect, but this outsider said that he, too, was below the Lord of Fire. It was strange that their lord had a new, mysterious guest, but maybe that's why the daimyo was willing to meet so quickly. In the end, though, they had no right to ask questions. With a nod to the strange young or maybe just short man, they opened the double doors that were 2.5 stories high to reveal a man waiting. The mark of fire on his hip showed that he was one of the 12 guardians, even though he was so plain that it was suspicious. Before calling the 3 people forward, he gave them a small, friendly smile. He didn't wait, he just turned around and walked into the palace. Naruto was happy with how straightforward their meeting was, so he quickly picked up his pace, with 2 wolves slinking behind their alpha. As he had thought, the hallway was filled with wealth in ways that he didn't like. Red walls had gold veins that sometimes looked like wisps of smoke and sometimes like flames. Silver accents brought out the details. Flowers made of precious metals, rare stones, and even ivory were carved into all different sizes and shapes into the solid marble beneath his feet. Straight down the hallway was a red carpet that was at least an inch thick. This was probably done to protect the valuable flooring, which could easily get a few struggling countries back on their feet. As they moved deeper into the daimyo's domain, things kept getting better and better. Displays of weapons, armor, rare relics, and even strange mutated animals that had been kept alive were set up on the walls to impress anyone who was allowed to visit the palace. Guards were always there, but it's not clear if they were there to protect the daimyo and his family or to make sure the displays were safe. He got sick from it. This ostentatious display of wealth was not elegant, and its only real purpose was to show that the lord of this place was way too rich for his own good. He thought that a normal person might be impressed and a lord might be afraid to anger someone with so much money that they could just show off their wealth, but for a shinobi, it just felt wrong. Shinobi didn't hate money because they didn't want to be rich. On the contrary, they were a bunch of greedy jerks. What they didn't like was how the money was being used. To put it simply, this was all a waste of time. None of this made any sense. Yes, it could make lords nervous and commoners feel small, but there were better ways to show off one's wealth than in such a tacky way. All of it came down to power. Money was a form of power, and when you showed it off, it reminded people of your power. He knew that, but he thought it would be better to use it to do something. Nothing shows power like spending a lot of money on other countries or building huge monuments to your country, your family, and, most of all, yourself. Gather an army, control the markets, and grab a small country by the neck with your wealth until it can't work without your permission. That was strength, and that was the way to show it. Not by turning your house into a museum full of overpriced trinkets and family heirlooms that, as far as anyone can tell, could have been made by your blacksmith the day before. Of course, that was the problem with nobles. This was the only way they knew to show that power and money were the only things they cared about when the daimyo was in charge of such a large army. Even if the daimyo hated this crap as much as he did, he would have to show it off to show other lords who was in charge here. In Naruto's case, though, he really didn't have to worry about it. When he first met Mito, a long time ago, he told her that he answered to 2 people. That's why, when they walked into a large throne room dripping with gold and lit with soft orange light, he dropped to one knee. As a shinobi of Konohagakure no Sato and a shinobi in training at the time, he owed his loyalty to the Hokage and, above him, to the daimyo. Even before he started training, he owed this man his loyalty as a resident of Hai no Kuni and a member of the Imperial Fire Court. But only 2 people in this room knew who he was, so it's not surprising that the other people were surprised. Lords often bowed to each other, but they didn't kneel as much. The daimyo didn't mind, though. As he got up from his throne, he hid a small smile behind a favorite fan. When the whispering stopped, he looked at the other people in the room. A lot of guards, a few maids, and 2 of his children. and gave them scolding looks. He then went back to smiling. "Tsukiyomi Dono, please stand up. Aren't we both lords here?" While he stayed on his knees, Naruto's covered head moved up to meet the daimyo's eyes. "Right now, I'm not a lord. I'm just a member of your court who has bought land outside of your territory." His voice was soft but clear. It was neither strong nor weak. The tone was even and did nothing more than say the words. "A member of my court?" One of the lords asked with a curious look. "That's interesting. Tell me, Tsukiyomi-san, if you were able to take over a country that I didn't control, why do you now kneel before me? It must hurt your pride to bow down to me when you could just as easily call yourself lord of your new country." "I was born here, my lord, in the land of fire. I've lived my whole life in this country, and I've been loyal to you since birth. Just because I've gotten rich doesn't mean I'm no longer under your rule, and as long as I'm alive, I'll keep doing what I promised." Swore. He thought about it for a moment before it hit him, which made his face light up a lot. "Ah, I see. You are a warrior, not just a man who has built an army and used it to become a lord. So, what are you? A samurai, a shinobi, or maybe just a warlord who has avoided both on your way to power?" "Both I and the people I command are shinobi." The daimyo made a strange sound in the back of his throat. He had obviously noticed that the man kneeling in front of him didn't say he was a shinobi, but rather, shinobi, as if he were the standard. It was arrogant and cocky, but most shinobi had more than enough power to overthrow a daimyo and all of his forces with just a small group a euro. A few dozen should have been enough a euro, but no one had bothered to do it. People said it would lead to shinobi wars, but he hadn't heard of this group or the country they took over, so he didn't think it would be too hard to keep other villages in the dark. He said he was from Hai no Kuni, which meant he was from Konohagakure no Sato, a place known for prodigies more because the rest of their forces were so painfully average a euro, and often even were C euro, than because they were better than their fellow villagers' forces. Strangely enough, though, the prodigies that were so obvious among their less talented friends often stood out more than those from other villages. It was really strange. It was almost as if all their friends' potential had been taken from them and given to them instead. At the very least, it kept things about even. This young man, on the other hand, seemed to stay out of sight, maybe on purpose, and managed to take over a country without anyone noticing. At the very least, the daimyo took it as a sign of respect for what he had done. "So you are," he said. "I have many more questions, shinobi, but the first is probably the most important because it will determine how we deal with each other." He stopped and looked into the purple eyes of his guest, which glowed in the soft light of the room in a slightly ominous way. "What country has fallen to the shinobi who goes by the name of Tsukiyomi and his pack of wolves?" "One most wanted, my lord," he said, and everyone in the room could feel the smile that was hiding on his lips. "I'm sure you know about the wealth it has accumulated over time and the potential it has. I come before you today with that country in the palm of my hand. I kneel before you representing the new order of Nami no Kuni." That, above all else, most certainly gained the daimyo's attention and he broke out into a grin behind his fan. "Oh. Is this true? So, I think it's safe to say that we do have more business to take care of, Tsukiyomi Dono. Should we go back to my office?" So, the first step had been taken. The rest would come quickly after. The daimyo poured himself 2 glasses, leaving his fan on the table and a smile on his face. He took one and sat down in a red armchair by the empty fireplace, his bare feet sinking into a red carpet that looked more like an unkempt lawn than a floor. If there was a limit, no one had told the people who built and decorated this palace over the years. The lord gestured to the last cup in a lazy way, but he didn't say anything. Out of courtesy, he took it, but he didn't move to sit down, which made the daimyo frown a little. "We're the only ones here, so don't worry about how you look. Have a seat and we can discuss these recent developments properly." A curt nod later and he took his place in the chair across from the daimyo of Hai no Kuni, letting his eyes roam quickly over his surroundings. The walls here, like most of the palace, were a deep red and in the gold light of the room seemed to glow warmly. To his left was the fireplace, unlit despite the imminent winter. To the right, at the far end of the room, was a large, ornate desk piled high with papers and reports that the daimyo had yet to read. There were curtains behind it, but the lack of light showed that they were just for show and there was no window hidden behind them. He could understand that, since the wolves had never been comfortable with him being out in the open, and a window to an office was a glaring weakness. Behind the daimyo's chair was a wall filled from floor to ceiling and left to right with overflowing bookcases. Behind his own chair and to the far right were a few filing cabinets nestled into the corner. The door was also behind him, about halfway along the wall. In the end, the room was pretty simple, focusing on functionality as it served its purpose as the daimyo's study. Naruto was sure there was a proper office somewhere for other, more official meetings. If the daimyo was agreeable today, the next time they met would probably be there. If he won the man's favor, however, he might be lucky and future meetings might continue to take place here, away from the nonsense of nobility. Such thoughts should be saved for another time, though, because as soon as he looked calm, the daimyo went on. So, that's better, right? He didn't wait for an answer. Now, you come to me as Tsukiyomi and hide your face, but before we start, I need to know who I'm dealing with. Otherwise, I won't be able to tell you from a fake, and we wouldn't want that, would we? Before he nodded, Naruto narrowed his eyes and quickly swept them around the room to make sure no one was hiding. But not before he hissed. This can't leave this room, the daimyo said. If he was angry, he didn't show it much. Instead, he smiled and leaned back. Yes, you, a shinobi from Konoha, just took over a country. I know why you want to keep things secret. First, the hood was pulled back, revealing his blood-red hair, which looked like it was on fire in the dim golden light of the room. His skin also changed in response to the light. Along with the normal, almost ethereal glow his pale skin gave off when it was next to dark areas, there was a hint of gold around him, just like the lights. Like the moon, whose spirit gave him his name, he reflected the light of the sun and looked so much like the sister spirit that the daimyo was stunned for a moment. When the lord took off his scarf, he saw a face with features that showed he was from a noble family. If you hadn't said you were Tsukiyomi, I probably would have thought you were his wife, and if I were a very honest person, I might have thought you were really Izanagi's child. But maybe you're not wrong to try to look like the moon god, since you don't look like a normal person. Naruto gave a small bow from where he was sitting, then pulled his hood back up to hide his face from the light. However, his scarf was still pulled down to his neck, so the daimyo could still see most of his face. Thank you so much for your kind words. The daimyo could tell that the young man in front of him didn't like the compliment and probably didn't think much of his looks. This was to be expected, though, since he seemed like a man of action who cared more about the impression he made with his work than with his looks. Still, there was something about his face that reminded him of someone he knew a long time ago. It was close, so close, just at the tip of his tongue, and it probably would have stayed that way. But he didn't have to rely on a faint whisper in the back of his head to remember what he was trying to remember. He had the answers right in front of him. I don't know your face, he said at first, but it makes me think of something I did. Tell me, what does your body call itself? The name Naruto was given to me. Naruto? No one else. You look like you're from a noble family, so you can't expect me to believe you don't have a last name. When someone said, I had one, it usually meant they were shamed out of a clan or noble family, but that wasn't always the case. Instead of asking for more information right away, the daimyo took a moment to think about what he knew. The boy had a familiar face, noble blood was clear, and he no longer had his family name. So why did he feel like he knew something about him? Naruto? Where have I heard that name before? Then he realized that an official renunciation sent by a member of an old clan had been brought to his attention 2 years ago, when the person in charge of official records realized how important it was. Yes, now I remember. You used to be the Uzumaki prince, right? Naruto gave a small grimace in response, but the lord couldn't tell if it was because of the clan or because he was a noble. No matter what, he answered. I am. Wow, that's interesting. To think that you ended up not only before me but also in charge of a country. It's only been 4 years since your mother was here. She brought your sister with her, and I wondered if I'd ever get to meet you. He smiled and said, I guess that's the answer to that question. I thought she would come, Naruto said. After her husband died, she probably felt the need to strengthen the ties between the Uzumaki, who used to live in Uzushiogakure, and your land of Hai no Kuni. You call your dad, her husband. Is this because you've left the clan, or is there another reason? The daimyo had always liked the man who had given birth to the previous prince. It would be a shame if his son didn't feel the same way. I only know him as that. That was strange. He couldn't really mean that all he knew about his father was that he married his mother, could he? That was more than some people knew, but any child of a legend should know what they stand for and who they should try to be like. It wouldn't be fair to them otherwise. Are you saying you don't know anything of him? I know he was a shinobi who died 12 years ago when the Kyuubi attacked. And that's it. That's all I know about the man who gave birth to me. The daimyo's face showed that he was upset. He knew that some secrets had to be kept secret, but some were just too big to hide. Are you well, my lord? The voice broke through his thoughts, and he gave the young man across from him a weak smile. I'm fine. I guess I'm just a little shocked. I would have thought that someone would have told you who he was, since his shadow will always be over your head until the day you die. So, you know him, right? Yes, I did, she said, and the smile turned sour. He was someone I liked and thought of as a friend. He was always welcome here, and he reminded me a lot of the son I never had. He didn't come by very often, but he always wrote and usually talked about the projects he was working on with one of the Sanin. Jiraiya-sama. He, or she, laughed. No, not his mentor. The man had nothing left to teach him except sage techniques, which even he hadn't mastered completely. He was working with another Sanin, Orochimaru. He often said that Orochimaru was as smart as he was, and sometimes even smarter. From what I know, they were close and often worked together on different ideas. Both of them were very interested in sealing, even though they did it in different ways, and your mother's collection of Uzumaki sealing techniques helped them a lot over the years. Now that was interesting, and it would also explain why the Rouge Shinobi from Konohagakure was his godfather. The Sanin must have left Konoha sometime after his father died, and with him gone, it was likely that no one bothered to change the fact that he was one of his godparents. After all, with him gone to who knows where, the chances of him ever being a part of his godchild's life were slim, even if something happened to his mother. People should always be prepared for the worst, but even that seemed unlikely. It didn't seem to matter, either, since a living parent hadn't stopped him from getting in touch with his godson. Oh, I see, so that's why he's my godfather, said the daimyo, who was surprised, but not in a bad way. Is he there? Yes, that makes a lot of sense. Your father was well liked and respected, but he didn't have many close friends. Orochimaru was probably the only person he was close to more than your mother. Have you talked to him recently by any chance? Naruto's purple eyes got narrow. No matter who his father is, he is a traitor. As a shinobi from Konohagakure and a member of the Imperial Fire Court, doing this would not be a good idea. The daimyo just waved one hand to dismiss what he said. Maybe as a shinobi from Konoha, but being a member of the court has nothing to do with it, he said in response to Naruto's questioning look. Konoha is pretty far away from the rest of Hai no Kuni, and the court tends to ignore most of what goes on there. As far as we're concerned, he's only ever hurt the people of Konoha, and they're partly to blame for living in a shinobi village when so many people in the trade are known to have mental illnesses. Because it's Hai no Kuni, Konoha shinobi can take anyone they've marked as a criminal back to their village, unless the court has given them sanctuary in Hai no Kuni, in which case they can only be punished if they step foot in Konoha. However, those people aren't necessarily criminals in Hai no Kuni itself, since they haven't yet gone against the country. Sounds like bullshit. The daimyo gave a shrug. You have to remember that the idea of hidden villages isn't that old a euro, only it's been around for about 100 years. We're still trying to find the right balance between the hidden villages and the countries they're sworn to protect, so we take a loose stance and tighten as needed. So far, we haven't seen any reason to make enemies with the Rouge Sanin, and in all these years, he hasn't shown any interest in his old village. Well, I guess that's a good thing. The arch of his brow went up. I've given him an open invitation to move to Nami no Kuni, she said. Your father would be happy. Not many people liked Orochimaru because he made them feel uncomfortable. It would make him proud to see his son get along with the Sanin. You were going to tell me who he was, right? Ah, yes, I'm sorry I got sidetracked. Your father was the Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato. I don't know why you wouldn't have been told. You're a fine young man with a good head on his shoulders. I suppose some might say it was for your own protection, but you conquered Nami no Kuni. If you can do that, I think you can keep yourself safe, and even if you can't, you. The Yondaime, Naruto softly said again. I'm the son of the Yondaime. He had not the slightest idea what that meant and didn't have time to think about it. He had to remember that he was here on business. When everything was over, he could think about what it meant for him and, most importantly, how he could use it to his advantage. Yes, do you need a moment? I just told you a pretty heavy truth, and I don't blame you if you need time to process it. No, thank you. I don't need it, if you keep on. Still, there was a moment of silence because the conversation got off track. Naruto was the one who finally broke it. Would it be too much to ask to borrow a courier, my lord? I need to send a letter to Commander Sai so he can give it to his sister. I need her to look into some things, and they should both know about this new development. Not at all. Don't take this the wrong way, but it will let me confirm that you have Wave. I'd like to believe you, but I need to be sure or the court will never let me forget about it. Of course, it's better to be careful than to lose. I'm glad you get it, but I'm a little bit curious. What about? Why would you talk to the commander's sister? Don't you trust him to lead the wolves? Yes, but the wolves are not the only thing I'm working on. Oh, you're busy. Didn't you just take over a country with the wolves? The chance came up sooner than I thought it would. Oh, I see. That was pretty lucky. Yes, Nami no Kuni will help me with my other plans, especially if things don't go as planned. And you think they will? Better careful than defeated, Naruto said over and over. That's why I'm here, he said. Yes, I guess that's why you came to see me. Whether you're a subject or not, you're way too ambitious to have brought up your country with the idea of giving it to me. Yes, but that doesn't mean you can't get something out of this deal. I wouldn't be so stupid as to ask you for something without giving you enough in return. Nami no Kuni is known for how much money it can make. This palace has been filled with priceless treasures for hundreds of years, but the riches made in your new country often threaten to encroach on the territory that has rightfully been its since the beginning. I know you and your wolves will benefit a lot from those riches, even though most of them are going to the locals and traders. Supporting your rule and allying myself with your new country would open up a lot of doors for Hyuga no Kuni, he said with a sly smile to the young man across from him. It's also the only way I could have a claim on the country without jeopardizing my standing in the elemental court, but I'm sure you already know that. Naturally. You wouldn't come to me if you weren't ready, right? Now that Orochimaru has been welcomed to a rich land and a big pack of wolves is watching over it, should we get down to business and talk about all the great ways we can help each other? I'm sure that this relationship will be very helpful. He, or she, laughed. For you, boy, you don't know. Hyuga no Kuni has wanted the land that Nami no Kuni owns for a very long time. Now that we have it, I do think that it deserves a pretty good reward. They talked all night, only stopping to eat at the daimyo's table. Eventually, Naruto got the courier he had asked for, and the daimyo of Hyuga no Kuni officially recognized him as the daimyo of Nami no Kuni. Naruto and his wolves were given rooms in the palace as honored guests. A week later, after the courier's return, the two set their plan into action. Tsukiyomi of the wolves was recognized formally by the daimyo of Hyuga no Kuni as the lesser daimyo of Nami no Kuni before being granted a seat within the imperial fire court as dictated by a treaty that had been signed only seconds later. With the seat in the court came his own noble house, the first of its kind to be bound by oath rather than blood, and the House of Wolves was born. Two daimyo were happy that day. One because he was able to get free access to the country that used to be the world's trading center, and the other because he was able to get his forces promoted to a house in a bigger court. It was a day that neither of them would forget soon. The carriage slowly came to a stop, which couldn't be right since they had just left the capital of Hyuga no Kuni an hour before, fully stocked and with brand new horses. Why were they stopping? Even though he wanted to peek out the curtains to see why they weren't moving, they had threatened to send Mai after him if he didn't stop, so he hit the back of his hand against the door instead. When he heard tapping on the glass instead of seeing the door open a crack, he had to roll his eyes. Of course, the one time he didn't look out was the time they wanted him to use the window instead. The fact that they wouldn't open the door, though, told him that they thought there was a threat to his safety, more so than what made them keep him hidden away. He moved the curtains so he could look out the window, but all he could see was a wolf with one eye on the front of the carriage. Naruto decided to get right to the point because they still had a long way to go and he really wanted this trip to be over. Why do we have to stop? There's a woman walking down the road. Naruto's eyebrows went up. And? We can't be the only ones to use this road. She's not moving, Tsukiyomi-sama. So, have you made sure she's still alive? She's alive, but she's standing still in the middle of the road, the wolf said after a short pause. She's staring at us like she's been waiting. Why didn't you say that from the beginning? What does it matter? Has anyone talked to her yet? No, so far we've all just kind of looked at each other. I think the others are waiting for her to speak before they say anything. Naruto let out a sigh. The wolves were better able to act like regular people than Root, but their failed training still showed. Then tell the other people that they have two choices. Either they talk to her and get everything straightened out so we can move on, or I'll do it myself. The wolf was almost shocked that he would even think about leaving the safety of the carriage before the wolves had checked the perimeter and set up suitable posts. The idea that he would then approach a stranger in the open was even worse. Naruto almost wished that they didn't have to wear masks as part of their uniform, because the face the man would have been making would have been pretty funny. Of course, Tsukiyomi-sama. I'll tell them right away. He started to leave, but stopped and turned back to his lord. Please stay safe. In the end, that was what they cared about the most, and everything they did was done with the hope that it would keep him safe. He didn't think it was because they thought he was weak, but because they didn't want to lose him. He had given their lives meaning again and made them more than just sleeper agents waiting for a crisis. So they loved him for that. Naruto gave the man a soft smile, which he could only see because he had taken off his scarf during the trip. I'll be fine, my child, because you're all here to keep me safe, right? The wolf seemed to perk up when he spoke, perhaps because he seemed to believe what he said and because he called the wolf by a more friendly name. Yes, Your Honor. After that, he didn't waste any time and hurried off to make sure his lord's will was done. Admittedly, he did this more to make sure his lord's will was done than because he wanted to talk to this person in person. During the trip to the capital, Tsukiyomi had grown to dislike that carriage more than seemed reasonable. Maybe it wasn't the carriage itself, but what it stood for. The useless role it forced him to play and the slow burden it put on the journey. Or maybe it was just the trip. Tsukiyomi was a man who liked to get things done, so spending so much time on the road probably felt like a huge waste to him. The wolf moved quickly to the front of the carriage, where some of the wolves had gathered across from the woman. The others were either hiding behind her in the trees, ready to attack, or surrounding the carriage in case they were attacked from another direction. The second driver seemed to be at the front of the group, so he went to them. When he told them what their lord had said, he got a quick nod, so he knew they felt the same way about their lord's safety as he did. The second driver went up to the woman without worrying about his own safety to make sure this was taken care of before their lord got too antsy and took matters into his own hands. He spoke quickly and quietly, nodded, and then went back to the group. She says that she came here to talk to Tsukiyomi-sama. She calls him Naruto, which is a good sign, but you should check with Tsukiyomi-sama to make sure that they know each other and that you can trust her. Did she say someone's name? No, but she said, Mother Crow, would make sense to him. The wolf that told the carriage driver what Naruto wanted did a quick nod and went back to the side of the carriage. Oh, my. When the curtains opened again, Tsukiyomi of the House of Wolves peered out. He hadn't noticed that they were closed, and it gave him comfort to know that his lord was taking steps to keep himself safe, even though he could easily ignore the advice of his wolves. Yes, little one? She says she's here to talk to you. She didn't tell us her name, but she said we would recognize her as Mother Crow. Naruto's lips twitched into a smile. Yes, that can only be one person. She is welcome to join us, so please bring her here so we can keep going. Yes, my lord. That made him feel a little better. Even if they didn't know who their lord was meeting with, he did, and he trusted them enough to let them in. He would have preferred that they weren't alone and hidden together, but he didn't have much a choice. Also, his lord was a young man, and it was clear that his guest was a woman. Since he didn't know how they knew each other, it might have been best for the wolves not to be able to see them in the carriage. It only took a moment to find the woman. It might have been this Mother Crow, but it could also have just been a simple phrase to let Lord Tsukiyomi know who she was. She might have been a spy for his lord. A Euro, because she seemed very excited to see Tsukiyomi. When he went back to the carriage a second time, he knocked 3 times before opening the door and letting the woman jump in. He tensed up for a split second before he realized that she was sitting half in his lap and had wrapped herself around the young lord. He knew his lord liked his privacy, and a situation like this seemed to call for even more privacy than usual. He closed the door with a small smile, and their lord seemed happy based on his warm laughs, so he went back to the front of the carriage to tell the other people that they should keep going. Back in the carriage, Naruto put both of his arms around his guest while she put hers around his neck and pressed her face into his chest, just like the first time they met. This time, though, she had kept her mask on. He took one arm off of her and lifted her chin so he could take the strange orange mask off of her face. Once it was off, she put her face back against his again, and her whole body seemed to relax. It's nice to see you again, Makoto-chan. I take it you got my letter. This was the most likely reason for her being there, since he had told her where he was in the letter. She must have jumped at the chance to pay him a visit, which was the first time in 2 years. face still in his chest, she nodded to let him know that her crow had brought his letter back before he left for his trip. When she found out he was outside of Konoha, it was hard not to go see him right away. But since AIM was closer to the capital of Hai no Kuni than Wave, she decided to meet him there. I missed you, Naruto-kun. After her clan was killed, he was the only person she was close to. He was the son of a friend she had grown apart from, and she clung to the relationship with all her might, afraid to lose the only thing she had left. That didn't mean she was totally dependent on him or couldn't show that she was her own person, though, as she showed when she stepped back and punched him in the shoulder with a pout that didn't seem right for a woman her age, but wasn't bad either. That was for putting that money in my purse when I told you I was fine, she said, leaning back and kissing his cheek. And that was for the money, which made things go much more smoothly. That's good to hear. How are things in AIM? She pouted again, but he hardly noticed. Wet. He didn't even try to stop the smile that spread across his lips. Even though she was old enough to be his mother, she talked like a child. He thought that since everyone else had left and she was hiding from Konoha, he was the only person she could let down her guard around. It was cute in a way. Oh, really? She looked up at him with the same mischievous sparkle in her black eyes that he had seen so many times in Anko's eyes. Her lips curled up in a small smirk. That's right, I agree. Huh, I never would have guessed. That must be awful. It was. In the summer, the winds from Hai no Kuni make everything hot and muggy, so I can't wear much more than my cloak because it's too heavy, and in the winter, it's so cold that I have no choice but to wear my cloak. She scowled at the red clouded black cloak she was wearing. I hate this stupid cloak. I could deal with it if it hugged my body, but it just hides my clothes so no one can see how great I look. He smiled wider. He hadn't spent much time with the woman, but she reminded him of a mix of Mai's kindness and Anko's fun personality. She was almost the best of both. And do you think you look great? She gave him a scowl, but it quickly turned into a pout. She unhooked the cloak and let it fall to the ground, which was hard to do in the carriage. She then kicked it to the seat across from him. That wasn't as interesting to him as her clothes. Her black jeans hugged her lower body tightly, but it was her top, or lack of it, that stood out the most. Right now, it looks like it's getting cold enough for her to wear more under her Akatsuki uniform, but not cold enough for her to wear anything but a black bra over her chest. She did a little spin, which would have been disastrous if they had hit a bump in the road before he realized she was answering his question and waiting to hear his opinion. I guess you do. Maybe I should start hating that cloak, too. She smiled at him and went back to sit next to him, pressing herself as close to him as she could while his arm was wrapped around her waist. She hadn't talked to another person in 2 years, which was her choice more than anything else, though it was affected by the fact that she was now in Akatsuki. Before she had to leave, she planned to make up for lost time and get what she wanted. He smiled at the woman and couldn't help but think that this trip was already looking much better than the last one. He wanted Mai to be with him, but a Makoto was just as good. She walked carefully through her house, making light, quiet steps. Not too long ago, she would walk down these same paths with confidence, sure that her position in the clan would keep her safe. Back then, she knew that she was a target because she was the daughter of the clan leader. She just didn't think that the people who might try to kill her were so close. Or so many. Kumo had always wanted the Byakugan, and Iwa would be glad to attack Konoha's most powerful clan. She had never thought that danger could come not only from within her village, but also from within her own clan Yuro, the clan she was supposed to lead after her father left. She knew better now, and she knew that the pieces on a board she couldn't see were moving. She was no longer a player in the game. She was just another square that would fall when the other players moved. So, she had 2 choices. She could leave the board, or she could be crushed. People often said she was proud and only cared about herself, but she wasn't a fool. She had to get away. Plans had been made, thrown out, and made again as she tried to figure out how to get out of this mess without losing everything. No matter what, she would have a lot to lose, but not her life. If her father and the clan elders were able to stop the cult that had formed within the clan and was ready to attack, she would be able to return to a broken, failing clan because none of the branch members would be left alive out of fear of another uprising. If the cult her sister led won, on the other hand, she could die or something much worse. She didn't want to try the kindness of the people she had used her status and curse seal to make miserable. As was already said, she wasn't stupid. No matter what happened, if she stayed with her clan, bad things would happen that she couldn't handle on her own. She also couldn't face the outside world on her own. She didn't know enough about the world of shinobi and the terrible things that went on there, but she didn't know enough about how regular people lived their lives either. After being taken care of by servants for years, she would never be able to fit in. She also knew that Konoha was still the safest place for her, so she couldn't leave the village completely. She had to leave the clan without drawing too much attention to herself and set herself up in Konohagakure. That wouldn't get her out of this mess by itself, but it was by far her best chance. But in order to set herself up, she had to find a way to keep herself and the people she brought with her from her soon-to-be former clan safe. Even though she didn't want to admit it, she needed someone to protect her. It was too bad she wasn't old enough to get married yet, because she could have set something up with the easy-to-control Nara heir or the mature Aburame heir. Even Akamichi's happiness wouldn't be too hard for her to deal with if it meant she would be safe. The Uchiha didn't have a real clan anymore. The son of the head of the Inuzuka wasn't good enough to marry a noble woman like her, and the Yamanaka couldn't give her the protection she needed. She thought that the Uzumaki could be good, and that if the head could get her son back into the clan, she could marry him and be safer than with the others. He might not be as easy to control as the Nara or as simple as the Aburame, but he was still better than the Inuzuka prince, even if he was a bit wild. From what she had heard about him, he seemed to be more calm and collected than Uzumaki had been in the past. So, he wasn't available, and getting married wasn't a choice yet. She could always add it to the end of her plans, but she would need something to protect her until she could put them into action. When she got to the dining room of the main family and looked around again for danger, she quickly turned them off. It was rude to turn them on during a meal, and her father would start asking questions that would further link her to this mess. But that didn't stop her from taking a quick look around the dining room. As usual, her father sat calmly at the head of the table and drank his morning tea. The room was empty except for one branch member who was in a side room taking care of the food from the kitchens next door. Even though her sister was a member of the branch, she was sometimes seen at the table. This was because she was his daughter, branch or not, and he hoped she would slip up and say something about how she had avoided being branded. The elders were still a little worried that the seal didn't work, but they didn't see that it was more than just fate that set her free from that bond, and that it also meant that the bonds of those who followed her would soon be broken. Civil war was on the verge of happening, but they couldn't see the signs in the future because they were too focused on the one event. But that was good, she thought, because they wouldn't expect her to run away as soon as they saw trouble, so they wouldn't be able to stop her. That is, if she could come up with something. But her sister wasn't here this morning. She was either eating with other branch members or having a cult meeting, or she just wasn't here yet. She had no idea what she would have liked to have happened. She and her sister had their differences, but did the girl hold those differences against her? She always seemed nice and caring, so she didn't seem like the right person for a cult at all. If that was true, did that mean that the wolves were really in charge? That you could have done that. She couldn't go to them directly, but Naruto, the former prince of the Uzumaki clan, had some connection to them. If she could get protection from him, it wouldn't matter if he went back to the Uzumaki clan or not. If she got married to him, she would still be safe from the wolves. And if the wolves were in charge of Hinata no Makoto's cult in some way, which would make sense given her sister's ties to Naruto, she could avoid the branch family's anger when they rose up by staying under their protection. It was just right, if it works. Hinata would have to risk the wolves if she didn't like her or if Naruto didn't want to help her. How likely was it that she would be shut up just to be safe? Even as she walked into the dining room, she had a slight shiver. She didn't even want to think about what could happen if they decided that letting her live was too dangerous. There were many ways to make people disappear, so dying would once again be a good thing. She wasn't Neji, but maybe fate had something to do with her recent thoughts. First, she was warned, and now she is being shown where she has the best chance of surviving the storm. Almost as if to prove her point, her sister walked into the room as soon as she sat down. Her sister was both the key to her salvation and the key to her death. It was humbling to think that fate was using her sister to decide what would happen to her. Even if the older girl wasn't fate's chosen, as the branch family seemed to think, she couldn't deny that her fate was now tied to her sister, whom she had put down and teased just like the other branch members. It would teach them that fate was the most important thing and that it worked in ways they couldn't know. Even though it had plans for you, everything you did could change the path it sent you down. Maybe it wasn't a good idea for her to put herself above other people when they were all at the mercy of fate. She didn't know what role the people around her were to play, whether they were favored or not, and the best way to make fate mad was to mess with its plans. Those plans couldn't be stopped because fate would make sure they happened, but that didn't mean that if you did something that could change fate, it wouldn't punish you for it. Fate was happy to punish you, even if it meant messing up other plans. It would figure out how to deal with you soon enough, stealing whatever path you were going to take and using the fact that you exist as a warning to others. Seeing her sister made her realize how close she had come to messing up Fate's plans. From now on, she would have to be more careful. As her sister sat down at the table in silence, no one spoke. Her father didn't even look at her. She did, however, pay close attention. Her sister was too important to the future of the clan and to her own life for her not to care about her. With the pale eyes that were typical of their clan, she looked at her sister's face almost desperately to figure out how she was feeling. Like a proper Hyuga, which wasn't a word that could have been used to describe her before the failed branding, she kept her face in check. The eyes, on the other hand, were not so easy to change. Many people had trouble reading the all-seeing eyes of their noble clan, but those born with Hyuga blood learned to spot signs that the Byakugan was turned off almost as well as they could with normal eyes. Her sister had calmed down, and she had no idea what to think about it. There was a mix of confidence and worry, but both of those feelings were overshadowed by a peace that shouldn't have been there. She knew there would be trouble, but she thought she could handle it. For someone who was afraid of things like that happening, being on the other side of this great game was not comforting. Hyuga Hanabi, the heiress of the great and noble Hyuga clan of Konohagakure no Sado, knew at that very moment that her sister would win no matter what happened in the next fight. The more she thought about it, the more she knew she had to get away, and the more desperate she got, the faster she tried to make sure she would live. That desperation, however, would not be seen. "I haven't heard much of your friend lately, Hinata-san." Hanabi's voice was calm and controlled, despite the nervous knot in her stomach and rapidly beating heart. Maybe doing this in front of her father wasn't such a good idea. Is he laying low now or just waiting for his next move? Her sister's eyes snapped to her so quickly she nearly jumped back in surprise. Evidently she had not been expecting for the former Uzumaki prince to be brought up. Neither, one might note, was her father, who, after a suspicious look to her, gazed questioningly at his firstborn. "I don't know what you're talking about, Hanabi-sama. Naruto is a very private person and tries his best to avoid attention." "Yes, but he received quite a bit of attention when he declared you under his protection and went against the Yamanaka. I hear they're still recovering." While the eldest sister tried to come up with something to say in response, their father seemed to look at her for the first time, as though something hadn't clicked until just then. "He did declare that, didn't he?" The clan head seemed almost troubled by the thought, not that Hanabi knew why. It was likely it somehow involved the Uzumaki clan, though. And the Yamanaka did indeed find themselves in a rather poor condition afterwards. She hadn't expected any input from her father, as he usually preferred to silently observe any discussion rare as they were between his two daughters. It could, however, work to her favor. Yes, he did. Hinata had been doing better lately, the lack of expectations on her shoulders as clan heir giving her more confidence than she once had, but now she was caught off guard and Hanabi was well aware there were things about Naruto she knew but needed to keep silent about. Those truths, unfortunately, would actually be detrimental to her own plans should they come to life. Therefore, despite the fact that she could get her sister to spill them without too much trouble, Hanabi made sure to avoid anything about the group he may or may not have ties to. "The Yamanaka wouldn't have stood a chance against our clan, but did we ever show him the due appreciation for coming to the defense of one of its members?" This was directed more towards her father than her sister, but she continued to look across the table as if it weren't. Her father, as expected, was the one to answer. "No, we didn't. It didn't seem something to concern ourselves with at the time, but he did stand against an entire clan for the sake of our blood. He made no mention of what had happened to the clan he stood against, but it was clear he was still thinking about it. It's rather shameful, actually, to think I have not so much as met him 2 years afterwards." He paused in thought, his tea forgotten on the table. There was no doubt that his thoughts were directed towards the returned Uzumaki clan and their new vassals the Yamanaka. More than that, his thoughts were on young Naruto's connection to them. "Hinata. Why yes, Hiyashi-sama." Hanabi only barely caught the wince of her father when he was addressed like that by his eldest daughter. "Can you get into contact with Naruto-san for me?" Hi, Hiyashi-sama, but it may take some time." He rose a brow. "And why would that be?" Naruto-san is currently outside the village on leave. He doesn't have a team, so he's got a lot of freedom." "I see. Do you know when he'll get back?" "And no, but it's been a while, so he should be back soon." Their father ignored the slightly hopeful expression on the girl's face. It was obvious she wanted to see the boy again. Very well. As soon as you hear word that he's back, I want you to contact him. Of course, Hiyashi-sama, but, can I ask why? We need to thank him properly, of course. He turned to his youngest daughter. You, Hanabi, will make preparations for a dinner to be held once we learn he's returned. It will be good practice for when you take the mantle of clan head. Hanabi inclined her head gracefully. As you say, to Sama. He nodded to himself before looking back to his tea. With a frown he tested the cold tea before returning it to the table and standing up. I should be getting to today's work, remember your tasks. He left the room after that, despite having not eaten yet. Her father gone, Hanabi let a small smirk tug her lips. Yes, that worked out better than she could have hoped. A formal dinner would provide an opportunity to observe the boy and, with a little luck, make contact. If she could get him alone for just a few moments, she might be able to arrange a later meeting to obtain the protection she was going to need. Her sister, on the other hand, seemed dreadfully confused by the sudden development. At the same time, the idea of spending time with the boy seemed to please her. Had this been any other situation, Hanabi and quite possibly Hinata as well knew that the eldest would not be present for the dinner. But with her being in part the reason for the event, and because she was the one who knew how to get a hold of Naruto, who had proven rather elusive within a village of shinobi, she would be permitted to join. If her mark was gone, like the first one, it would be another point in her favor. Unfortunately, the second one had just stopped working, which meant her forehead was still marred by the seal. She would have to find a way to pay for it, but that wasn't her problem. Still happy, Hanabi almost didn't notice when the food was brought out or care that the branch members were confused by her father's absence. Looks like fate is finally starting to work out its plans. She could still get out of this. I have your mask, he said softly, running his left hand through her dark hair. Even though sunset had just happened, they still had a few hours to go before they stopped to let the horses rest. He wasn't sure if he would get out of the carriage when it stopped with her curled up against him. She didn't move much when she heard his voice. He wouldn't have known it was moving if he hadn't been able to feel it. My mask? Her orange porcelain mask was on top of her cloak on the seat across from them. She looked up at him with sleepy eyes because there wasn't much to do in the carriage other than talk or sleep. She searched his face as if it held all the answers. Your Anbu mask. Oh, she said, and she was fine with it. She turned back to his warmth and went back to sleep. Oh, her brain, still tired from lack of sleep, processed what he said, and she turned her eyes back to his with a mix of surprise and delight. Really?
Really? It's back in Wave. She pouted a little that he didn't have it now, but it quickly turned into a thoughtful frown. Most Anbu, no matter how long they were in the division, grew attached to what they liked to call their second face. How did you get it? We should have seen it when we were packing for your trip, right? You left it outside, and I was more worried about the woman crying in my arms. Kakashi picked it up for us, and the daughter of his client sent it to me when they were in Wave. She closed her eyes a few times as she thought about what was important. The client's daughter. Oh, yeah, Tsunami is a pretty civilian whose home his team stayed in during the mission. I ended up giving her a job working with Hana-san. Hana-san. Is she as pretty as this Tsunami? Asked a single, elegant brow. In this situation, most men would be very careful about what they said next. But Naruto was not like most men. He scratched his chin and thought for a while before shrugging. I don't know. Tsunami is a woman with curves, but she also has the softness of a civilian. Hana, on the other hand, is a young kunoichi, and her body shows it. So, if you could only keep one, who would it be? The tone of her voice might have told you that this was a trick question and that the right answer was her. No matter what, Naruto replied. Of course, Hana, he said with a small smile at the corner of his mouth and a sly look in his eye. He had, of course, known what the question was about. As she started to frown, he went on. After all, she is running my country. Her scowl turned into a pout. She asked, how am I supposed to be jealous if you say it like that? And got a soft laugh in response. He told her, it's not right for you to be jealous. Those two won't take you away from me, she said. It should have been said the other way around, like, she stole him from her, but it still sent two clear messages. Neither of them was going to leave for someone else, and what was more important was that he was the one who had her. The first thought gave her comfort, and the second made her feel warm inside. It wasn't because she wanted him to think of her as his, but because he knew she was there for him. She thought of herself as his new mother, no matter what anyone, even he, said. By taking care of him, she could heal her own broken heart and give her life a reason to go on after losing everything she cared about. He needed her, so as a guardian angel for the boy who had grown up too fast, she would be there for him. Those two. Are there others you aren't telling me about, Naruto-kun? Don't hold back on Karasu-ka-chan now, tell me everything. Others. You mean other women? Well, I guess there's Yugao-sensei, though she doesn't want me to call her that anymore. Anko-san, Kurenai-san, Mai-chan, Shizune-san, and maybe Ino-san. Oh, and I can't forget Hinata-san, she's helping me with things in the Hyuga clan right now. Oh, does my little Naruto really have so many women around him? I see them now and then, but that doesn't mean I'm surrounded by them. She hummed that she agreed but kept going. So, where are you with them now? Naruto's eyebrows went up. Come on, something must have happened, right? An accidental grope, an eyeful they didn't mean to give you, a peck on the cheek. I've already told you that you won't be replaced, so what difference does it make? Akatsuki is full of S-rank criminals. It's not exactly a place where I can look for love. A small growl rumbled in his chest at the thought of someone else getting their hands on what was clearly his, and Makoto had to admit it was probably a good thing she didn't get any chances to start relationships. Even though she wasn't really interested in one right now, it seemed like he didn't want to lose her to someone else. She was a Uchiha, so she couldn't be mad at him. So that means you'll have to find a partner for both of us. She frowned for a moment and then smiled in a mean way. She changed it to, or maybe not relationships. You could always just go have some fun and tell me about it. That would be fine with me. He looked at her. She was definitely acting more like her Anko side at this point. Perhaps you'd rather see pictures, or maybe you'd like me to record visits to brothels for you to use in your own time. As she hit him gently, her cheeks turned red. That's wrong, Naruto-kun. I'm not going to use you during my, private time. Then who are you going to use? He asked, raising both eyebrows and looking down at her with that mischievous gleam in his eyes again. She didn't have a good answer, so she huffed and crossed her arms over her chest and sank back into his side. So that's how it's going to be. You get to hear about what I do, but I don't get to know about you. That's not very fair, Makoto-chan. She said, with a red face, not like you've told me anything. So, if I tell you, you'll tell me. No. He made another funny sound. Well, I guess I won't tell you then. You have nothing to say to me because you're too busy taking over countries, he said. I guess you're right. Not much has happened back in Konoha, but I'm sure I could find a cute servant in Nami who would be happy to serve their daimyo. Makoto looked sad. You're too young for that. Until you're older, just touch each other. Are you still my mom? She answered right away, without any hesitation at all. Yes. He cocked his head, but he didn't argue. Okay. Then, at that point, they stopped talking, and silence spread through the train. After a few minutes, Makoto's soft voice broke the silence. See, can you? Whatever she wanted to say, she mumbled into his side and lost her train of thought. What? Makoto-chan. Can I do what? Can you call me Ka-chan? Naruto gave her a soft smile and kissed the top of her head. Sure, Ka-chan, he said. Even though it was dark outside, her bright smile made the carriage bright. Thank you, Sochi. The thin black shirt he was wearing and the walls were both cold. He probably should have worn more, especially in their base, which looked like a cellar, but he never liked to cover his torso because he thought it was too limiting. He was used to the cold, though, because he had lived in this country for most of his life and spent the rest of it traveling with the last Hyouden user in the world. He had to get used to the cold, so it was only natural that he did. When he got hurt, the numbness that spread over his exposed skin was like an old friend, and he was very thankful for it. He wasn't hurt right now, and he wasn't hurt any longer. At first, the weeks went by slowly, but as he got better, he was able to move faster until he got back to where he could get better care. Even though it wasn't much better than what his apprentice could do, at least they didn't have to try to get better while moving. Even small miracles were worth being thankful for. People leaving the room while quietly talking about the last meeting caught his attention, and he turned his head to see them. He didn't move from his place against the wall, with his arms crossed over his big chest, as dozens of people from the higher command structure left the room through the door on his left. Their number has always been a mystery to Maya Euro. Why do they have so many? Even though they weren't very big, having so many people in charge and involved in their plans was a bad idea that always made him nervous. It seemed like she wanted something bad to happen, like a spy or sympathizer to get into the vast upper echelons and have free access to information that was too important and valuable to lose. But he wasn't in charge, and it wasn't his fight or goal that they were trying to reach. He couldn't care less if the bloodlines were wiped out here or if they were worshipped as a sign of godhood. He wasn't there for the bloodline resistance. He was there for their leader, Terumi Mei. He was worried because of this. Please tell me you were just throwing out ideas. His voice was rough and impersonal, which didn't show how much he cared about the woman he grew up with, but that was how it usually was. Few people could really say they knew what he was feeling behind the persona he had made for himself with the blood of hundreds. This is because his words and voice changed just a little bit from time to time. Some people might think that being called a monster is a bad thing, but he liked it. Being a beast was better than being dead or, even worse, being weak. He would never again be weak. But that didn't mean he didn't care, and she knew that. Still, she acted as if she didn't understand what he meant, and maybe she didn't. Not too many people could really know when they had just come out of the shadows. Fewer still would understand. Yes, but it's a good one. I wouldn't have suggested it if it wasn't, he said. A single delicate brow rose as a challenge, which he easily met. It's not a good idea, it's a risk, and it's stupid. You don't know anything about them, so you can't expect to be able to deal with them. I can handle them the same way we've handled other groups like them, with money. They're mercenaries, that's what they do. They do what Tsukiyomi tells them to do. Tsukiyomi. Ah, yes. He never did give a full report on Wave, did he? It didn't matter, though, because he could already tell that she had made up her mind and there wasn't much he could do to change it. She was just as stubborn as he was, which was another thing he liked about her. The pack belongs to the Alpha. So all I have to do is get him to agree that the wolves should help us. Good luck. His words and the dismissive laugh that came next made her eyes narrow. He saw something wrong with her plan, whether it was real or not. What? You don't think I can do it? Warlords from as far away as soon as deserts are fighting for us because of me, and some of them are doing it for free. I'm sure I can work something out with a new group of mercenaries. They've been around for a few years, so they're not that young. Then why am I just learning about them now? They've been careful, waiting and getting stronger until they were strong enough to move on a global scale. That changes them. No, it makes them smart. You're hearing about them now because they just entered the global game. The only problem is that they've had time to settle. This isn't a new group trying to get power on a global scale and scrambling for influence. This is an established group that's grown strong enough to go global. There's a big difference. That means they won't take me up on my offer. It's not easy to pass up the chance to work with the future leaders of Kurigakure. You shouldn't worry about them rejecting it. You should worry about them accepting it. Everything they do is what Tsukiyomi tells them to do, and he doesn't do things for no reason. If he helps us, it's because our efforts fit into his plans, and if that's the only reason, he'll change his plans to take advantage of the opportunity a euro, to take advantage of us. That's how alliances work. Both sides work together to reach their goals. We're offering to pay for their services, so there's no reason for them to go against us. The same warlords who had joined the rebellion had mentioned the group. Some people had worked with them before, while others had met them. Not many people had to deal with them, which was a shame. Not many people go out, and the ones who didn't so much get out as they were let out. One could only hope to avoid the wolves' cruel teeth when the goal had something to do with territory or control. Only 2 of the dozen warlords had ever been on the other side of the wolves. Most of them led small groups of no more than 3 dozen men each. She had decided they were a group that needed help because of this. Those who had hired successful mercenaries could always say they did a good job, but it was more important to hear that from those they had worked against. They don't need a reason, but he does. We don't know what he wants, so letting his forces get close to ours is asking for trouble. You're too suspicious, he replied with a growl, and you're far too willing to trust them. On Tsukiyomi's orders, they killed Gato and his men and said Nami no Kuni was under their protection. This is the same group that had been Gato's top enforcers. They can say it's under their protection, but we both know they killed Gato to take control of the country. What's to stop them from doing the same thing here, from helping us get the village back only to kill our tired allies and take control of a hidden village? We all know that Gato used thugs. We have an army of shinobi, so the risk would be much higher. People like him don't take risks because they don't want to lose their power, and it's too easy for their men to leave them if something goes wrong. That's the problem. He doesn't need to be afraid. His forces are all Anbu level and fiercely loyal, some to the point of fanatical devotion. We're a ragtag group of rebels. Our will is strong but our forces are average. If we had numbers we'd be fine, if we had power we'd be fine, but we have neither, which is why you're looking for allies in the first place. If they're that skilled, we need to get to them before Yagura does. It's a risk, but I'm willing to take it. This could be the difference between winning and losing, he said, maybe, as he got off the wall and turned to leave. But will that alliance you want so badly be the thing that makes us lose? Then he left, leaving her alone in the room. She said quietly, I don't know, Zabuza. I don't really know. But what could they do instead? As it danced to avoid the light rain in this very boring country, the thick fog felt more like cold smoke. He had to force himself to take a shaky breath of cold air so he wouldn't start coughing because the damp air made him feel uneasy. They were used to the warm, dry air of the eastern forests, so they were surprised by how bad this place felt. Cold darkness covered this land, and big banks of fog and gusts of mist were always pushing it in. Rain was always there, and it was very rare to be able to hang clothes outside to dry. The constant rain was bad for both supplies and buildings, so the people had to change or lose everything to rot and decay. But from what they could see, those people seemed to be happy. Maybe it was a sign of something that the country's problems brought them all together and made the shipping town's light shine even brighter. Even though it was cold, the village itself seemed warm, even though everyone knew it wasn't. Still, crouching in the bushes and hiding behind trees sounded worse than sitting in the light with people who were happy to get away from where they lived. He didn't have many options, and neither did the other people with him. There wasn't much they could learn in the town itself, where the cocoon of light was still mostly filled with civilians. They thought it would be a few years before the town was big enough for them to sneak in and get information the way they liked. By sitting in a nice, warm bar with a bottle of hot sake and a lot of beautiful women to look at. He was just making himself miserable. This mission had no end date. If necessary, it could go on for years. They had already been here for a few days, and he couldn't imagine staying for more than a week. Well, he could, but not the way things were at the moment. In a room he rented, which he chose based on how close it was to the bar he'd been dreaming about. If they were in the same building, that would be even better. He could probably stay here for the rest of his life. The rainy weather made the town seem small and cozy, like a place to hide from the rest of the world. Even though it was a port town, and if what they had seen was any indication, it was on its way to becoming the trade capital of the world again, it felt like it was on its own. It was a shinobi's dream place to retire. Even though the fact that it was going to be back to its former glory made it less appealing, it was still better than many places. Even if it made it more likely to run into a hostile person, the crowds and large number of people who were always coming and going would also give some cover. You would be surprised at how many enemies a rookie chunin could make on a mission gone wrong. Thoughts like that were mostly kept to themselves, though, because the town, which was floating in a sea of fog and getting hit by a steady drizzle of midnight rain, was starting to look more and more like a safe harbor. He thought that it was a very safe harbor, both for ships coming from northern K's no Kuni or southwestern Kaminari no Kuni and going all the way around the continent to get there, and for tired travelers who had ended up in these boring lands. He let out a sigh, which caused small strands of warm air to move through the scarf that was tightly wrapped around his lower face. It didn't help to think about it now, because it would only make things seem worse. He brought his binoculars back to his face and looked at the far shoreline across from them. Even though the waterway wasn't very big, it was a natural barrier between the main area of Nami no Kuni and the borders. Because of this, Patrols tended to focus on the inside, leaving only border guards to watch the rest of the country. They could probably get closer euro. They had tested the inner patrols before and found that it was possible, though hard euro, but being farther away gave them more security. In a mission like this, it was very important to keep from being found out as little as possible. As it was, they were already risking the anger of two countries in a hidden village, as well as the anger of their families and loved ones, who would think they were traitors if they never came back, which could still happen depending on how long they were gone. It was unthinkable that two angry daimyo and a very angry cage would add to that belief. Or maybe even two daimyo. No one knew what happened to the last one, and they hadn't heard of another one yet. Still, one cage and the daimyo of Hino Kuni were more than enough to make them think twice and take every precaution they could to avoid being caught. Talking about the daimyo, who may or may not exist, people in the town said there was a ruler in charge. From what they heard from passing groups of traders, it was clear that someone had been put in charge. From what they heard, it was a woman. Sadly, that was the last piece of information they got. There didn't seem to be any other word for it besides attractive. A few people had said that she was young, but that could be anywhere from 12 to 20 or even a bit older. Even the governor, who was only referred to in the third person as the governor, didn't have a name. Still, they didn't expect to learn even that much from the traders who came to visit. It wasn't like they were going to meet this new leader, but it did give them a better idea of what was going on in the country. The guards of this land, who have been confirmed to be wolves, wouldn't have to answer to whoever was in charge here. Either their leader was working with this governor, who would be in charge of civilians to hide the wolves' military activities, or the wolves chose this governor. It wouldn't last long without a daimyo, but it would buy them some time, which meant the wolves were working on getting someone into that position to secure their control. Not much, but at least it was something. As his tired arm started to drop the binoculars, he caught a flash of lightning in the far distance. With a sigh of irritation, he put them back on his face just as the sound of thunder reached his ears. Based on how loud it was, it must have been a long way away. It was probably a storm over the ocean. He was hit by a sudden gust of wind, which made the raindrops hit the group even harder. They felt more like metal pellets than water. A storm, probably the same one out at sea, was getting closer. Based on what had already been seen, it was likely to hit the town in the next hour, and it probably wouldn't stop until noon the next day. It would give them great cover, but it would also block their view and make it nearly impossible for them to find their way. They were going to have to give up soon, or they would have just as much chance of getting back to tonight's camp as of walking straight into a group of wolves who were patrolling. Keeping that in mind and daydreaming about the warm sleeping bag he bought before the trip, he went back to the job at hand. For the night to have been worth it, they needed more information, and he would have rather not spent his time out here in the rain when he was only going to get a few hours of sleep before they had to move camp again. He took a quick look to his left at the town before moving to the northern forests, but he stopped and went back to the town. Before, they had seen people in the forests, mostly villagers working at the makeshift dump where they kept the trash from their restoration projects until it could be taken away by one of the few boats that could fit under the bridge. This was where they focused most of their attention tonight, hoping to see something that wouldn't be visible during the day, but he was drawn to a familiar sight in the town. 3 men and 3 dogs were walking down the street together, which wouldn't usually get people's attention. But these men were drunk, and their arms were wrapped around each other's shoulders as they stumbled out of a bar. Meanwhile, the 3 dogs walked perfectly in step to the side, keeping a constant distance from the men. They had been trained, but more than that, they were smarter than most dogs. Dogs can be trained well, but these animals changed their paths to get the 3 men to safety without ever leaving a group that moved too well together. Ninken. It had to be that, because nothing else made sense. They were in Nami no Kuni, but why? He quickly looked to his right and saw that one of his partners was still looking into the dark forests. The third and last person in the group was between them and further east behind them. He or she was watching for patrols coming from the west. After thinking about it for a moment, he decided that with the fog where it was, they weren't getting much out of the forests and spoke for the first time in hours. Inazuka was enough to get his friend's attention, and even the lookout turned his head to see. What? Was the almost hissed response as his friend flew to his side to see for himself. He could imagine how shocking it must have been, but he was still trying to understand it. Part of him thought it was funny that the dogs were working with the wolves, but another part of him didn't want to believe that one of their fellow Konoha clans was working with the group they always thought of as the enemy. It was a sad fact that couldn't be denied. There was no other reason for Inuzuka clansmen to be here in Nami no Kuni, a land controlled by the wolves, so soon after Gatos died and right after Kakashi's team came back. Even if they were trying to take advantage of the country, which didn't seem like their style, that wouldn't explain why the wolves were letting them. In some way, they had to be working together. He couldn't quite hear what his friend said under his breath, but he could tell by the tone that it was a curse. He felt that the thought was pretty close to how he felt about the subject. When he took another look through his binoculars, he saw that one of the men's headbands was reflecting neon lights. So, they weren't trying to keep it a secret. If he could get a better look, he might see a scratch that said they were Rouge Shinobi, which would make sense. They could have had a mission nearby, but the chances of that were slim. They could have left, but the place they chose was still strange. But none of those felt right, and they only stopped when they met another group, which didn't change anything. That showed that it wasn't too strange, which meant that they were welcome here. That was way more than odd. The two groups went in different directions. The Inuzuka went down a side street, while the other group went north, with light reflecting off their headbands. He stopped in shock, then leaned forward as if that would make what he saw much clearer. No, he hadn't made it up. 3 men wore headbands, just like the group of Konoha nin they had just passed. Was Konoha trying to do something? Was this a secret bid for power by the Leaf? The 3 of them stopped in front of a store. 2 of them stood outside in the rain while the third went inside. If he had just turned a little, there. It wasn't a leaf from Konoha, it was a musical note. There had been talk of a new village of sound, hadn't there? But that should have been farther north, right? He thought that since the borders were close, they might be trying to connect with or take over the newly freed country. But, just like the Inuzuka, the wolves weren't trying to get rid of them. It seemed odd. The third person came out of the shop with a bag, and the 3 of them kept walking north to the forest. They waved to the few people who were still working in the junkyard and kept going into the dark. Another, stronger gust of wind started to blow away the thick fog that was hanging over the rough water between them and the other shore. What little moonlight got through the thick layer of dark clouds and the occasional flash of lightning was it getting closer? He could just see the tops of the trees. One in particular stood out from the rest. It had a strange shape and grew in a slightly cubic way. That wasn't a tree, it was a set of supports. A break in the clouds let in just enough light to get a good look at the structure, which was made of a lattice of beams arranged in a circle with one point higher than the others. The light only lasted a few seconds, though, and the rest of the structure was hidden by the night when the light went out again. In those few seconds, he could see a tower taking shape, which made him stop. It just couldn't be, right? No, that's crazy. Wave wasn't completely stable yet, so they wouldn't try anything so soon, especially not with shinobi from other villages. Unless they were trying to get things back to normal by building their own secret village. It was a risky move, but they could do it, and if they did, it would help them a lot. They had enough money to support a shinobi village a small one for now, but they could probably support Konoha in the future without too much trouble and it would be easy to get other small countries to send their best young people here to learn. He shook his head at the thought, because shinobi from 2 villages were here. If Konoha was really helping another hidden village to gain favor or power in Nami no Kuni, more of their own shinobi would have known about it. It was too strange that only one clan from Konoha was involved, and that clan was known for being rude. A mission like this would be seen as mostly diplomatic, and the people on it would be those who could make things go as well as possible for Konoha. There was no good reason for the Inuzuka clansmen to be there, unless Konoha wanted to make friends by being brutally honest. A lighthouse wasn't likely because it was too far north and would only draw ships into the narrow waterway that connected Nami no Kuni to the rest of the world. However, a guard tower was a possibility. It was hidden, which was strange, but it didn't look like it was too far in. The trees could stay until the tower was finished, hiding the construction, and then be cut down to give a better view. However, it was also possible that they wanted the tower to be as hidden as possible and that it would only be used to watch the far shores while the home shores were watched by many patrols. Of course, that was assuming it was a guard post, or that it was intended to only be guard tower. It could just as well serve as the new home of the governor or barracks for the wolves, though why they might need a tower eluded him, and it could even be a station for receiving messenger birds for all he knew. If they wanted to figure out what it was for, they would have to get closer, which they couldn't do right then. A crack of thunder split the air, much closer than it had been earlier. The storm was getting close. Already, the rain, which was getting heavier quickly, was pushing back the fog that snaked around their feet. Some would stay because of the cold, he knew, but soon most of it would be gone, even what had been blocking their view for so long. Unfortunately, the heavy rain did the same thing and kept them from taking advantage of the clear night that was coming up soon. That's too bad, because it would have been a great chance to find out more about the building. When the thunder rumbled again, it sounded like an angry god was talking, so he made sure to put away his binoculars. They should have stopped for the day because the fog couldn't hide them any longer and they weren't used to working in the rain. It was just one more thing they couldn't handle right now. He turned to tell his friends what was on his mind, but his body had already taken off. There were some sounds that you could never forget, sounds that made you react before you even knew why. Most shinobi knew this, because it was something they all did. It was one of the many little things that really showed how experienced someone was in the field. This sound was made by a blade to the throat. A normal person would never be able to hear it, and a shinobi who hadn't heard it before wouldn't know what it was. But he had heard it so many times that he knew exactly what it was and would act as soon as he heard it. If the rain had been just a little bit louder or the thunder had gone off half a second later, he wouldn't have known. Even as he dashed down towards the chopping waters before him, he turned his head to take stock of the situation. Their lookout had been caught by 3 wolves, and a 4th wolf was nearby acting as their own lookout, so they didn't wait to start attacking him. It looks like they didn't want to take any chances, since they grabbed the first one they could instead of putting him to sleep and moving on to the other 2. A 5th and 6th wolf were on either side of his other friend. One was taking the blade off, and the other was pulling the body away to make sure it was dead. He could feel a 7th wolf coming at him quickly. He struck too early, he said sarcastically. Lucky me. Even when planning, it was sometimes hard to remember that the other side was also made of people. In that case, they weren't really people. They were just numbers and data that acted like people. There was always a difference between them and us, and sometimes it helped you and sometimes it didn't. Now, he was painfully reminded of that fact. He owed his life to the fact that his attackers, whom he didn't know, made a single mistake. It was humbling to think about. Only because the first wolf moved before his partner did he have any chance of getting away alive and, more importantly, of telling the clan what they had learned. But just as the Yamanaka would learn something from what the wolves did, the wolves could learn something from the team member they had captured. Yamanaka were good at withstanding torture, but even they couldn't last forever, and any kind of leak was unacceptable on a mission that didn't exist. When he looked into the eyes of his captured clanmate, all he saw was a small nod. It seems like there was nothing else to do. Reaching under his shirt, he tore off a piece of paper while making a half-ram seal with his other hand. With a throw over his shoulder and a pulse of chakra, 3 explosions lit up the clearing just as he dove into the water. He had to get back to Hai no Kuni, where Konohagakure no Sato gave him safety, or their sacrifice would have been for nothing. It was good that the wolves stayed close to his friends, because he knew he couldn't get away from them, but even they couldn't have gotten away from the tags in time. For this mission, the short fuses were chosen on purpose, and even a Kawarimi wouldn't have been fast enough once they realized what was going on. He thought that was their second mistake, and it meant that his clan form would always be linked to this event. Even though they were caught off guard, he couldn't help but notice how much luck had to do with his success tonight. Skill helped people plan ahead and change, but tonight showed that skill wasn't everything. With what seemed to be the help of luck's goddess, he thanked the god for his luck and the chance to save the mission. He never looked back to see where his clanmates had died or where the bodies or what was left of the wolves would be found the next morning. Maybe that was his biggest mistake of the night because he never saw the people who made it. Those who knew still, even if the water washed away his scent, they already knew where his den was. And the wolves did not have a reputation for being kind. Even though the explosions had just happened and his ears were still ringing, the lookout was already digging through his back. He leaned against a tree as the rain beat down on his body, which was hurt. He could already hear wolves in the distance, all of them trying to figure out what was making the noise. Well, at least most of them. Too many of them would have left their posts if they thought it might be a distraction, but most of them would have. He thought, I wonder if I should tell the commander about that. For situations like this, it might have been better for them to have response teams. Weakening the other patrols wasn't a good idea. Then again, he didn't really know how bad he had been hit yet, so it could have been a concussion talking. He still knew which way was up, and the trigger on his flare gun wasn't hard to figure out. With a pull, it screamed into the sky, leaving a red trail that attracted everyone who had heard the explosions. They were careful, but still quick. They were a collection of different groups that had come to this country under the leadership of Tsukiyomi-sama. Sober Inuzuka and their ninkin teamed up with the wolves right away to search, while the shinobi under Orochimaru's command took up combat positions around the complex they were building until they saw the emergency flare. As they were just across the river from where he was standing, they were some of the first to arrive all at once. Only one pack of wolves had been closer. He had heard that the similarities between their masters might have helped them work together well. The area was secured quickly, and in less than a minute, a medic was hovering over him. From the corner of his eye, he could see another one kneeling by a lump near the water. The only way he knew it was him was the thin fur trim on his arm guards. If the screaming, which he couldn't quite understand yet, was any indication, there was another survivor, but his condition seemed much worse than his own. The doctor next to him took off his mask so he could see better, said something, frowned, and tried again right by his ear. Still, he couldn't understand what was being said because the sounds were all mixed up. Neither the cacophony of shinobi gathering around them nor the symphony of the storm helped him figure out what was going on. Orders were barked, and he felt two other wolves lift him up. When did they get there? Who went straight to the village without stopping? Several other wolves gathered around him. They knew he was the best way to find out what had happened and didn't want to risk trying to shut him up. But he didn't pay much attention to that. Instead, he was more interested in how well everything worked together to get the job done. Behind a broken mask, he gave a small smile. The wolves did look like professionals, didn't they? They must be something to see. Part of him realized that he had never seen the wolves in action because he had always been a part of them, while another part of him wondered why he didn't feel like one right now. Definitely not a wolf, but a member of the pack. He felt much more like a hurt puppy at this point. So, he decided to take a nap, blissfully unaware that he was making the medic panic. The temporary medical center was pretty much what you'd expect, except that it wasn't going to be temporary for long. It had become Nami no Kuni's hospital in all but name, but she was still hesitant to call it that. It didn't feel very strong to her because it had cement floors and sheet metal walls. She knew it was pretty solid, but it didn't make her feel as secure as the Konoha hospital did. This building was one of the first to be finished, and the goal was to get it done as soon as possible, so that was to be expected. It wasn't meant to be a real hospital, it was just a stopgap until a real one could be built. And for being so simple, it did the job well. The inside was sealed and insulated. It was kept clean with great care in a country where mud was as common as dirt and where most people had lived on the street until recently. Lighting had been strung from the roof to keep things bright for the wolves with the most medical training and the few doctors they had been able to steal from small countries nearby. Gato's stores had a lot of things, and what they didn't have, he could easily buy with his money. The equipment was old, but it still worked, so it would be kept until a real hospital could be built. After that, she thought Tsukiyomi would bring in the best person she could find. Usually, there were twice as many guards as medical staff, but classes for wolves with the right skills were slowly changing that. At the moment, though, the number of guards had almost doubled. At first, she understood why. He was one of only 2 people who had survived, and while he wasn't in charge, he was the only one who could give them a report at the moment. She didn't know why the guards stayed after that, though. The lookout, as many people had started calling him because he didn't have to do much more than watch, had been briefed by Commander Sai when he woke up that morning, so even if someone came to get him, they wouldn't gain anything. She didn't want anything bad to happen to him, but the extra guard didn't seem necessary. She pointed to 2 of these guards at the front of the building and almost threw up because the building smelled like it had been cleaned. It did a good job with that part of a hospital. She and her family had always hated hospitals for the same reasons. They had to stay there, and their better senses made the bad smells even worse. It wasn't hard for her to find the room she was looking for because the building was small and easy to get around in. She walked in without being stopped by the guards who were standing right outside the room. There were some perks to being the governor. Being picked by Tsukiyomi himself made it even better. The patient was lying on a small bed in the middle of the room. He or she looked like a random person who had been picked up off the street and put in the bed. At first glance, it didn't look like he was hurt, and Sai said he only had a few small bruises. He was thrown off by the blast, but the doctors couldn't find any other damage to his head. Even so, he was kept around to be watched, just in case. Something that neither the patient nor the doctors liked, since they had to stop him from running away. Perhaps that's why the number of guards hadn't been cut. "Good afternoon, how are you feeling?" Her voice seemed to startle him, and he quickly turned away from the wall he was looking at. With brown hair about shoulder length and brown eyes, he looked like any other person from the east of the elemental nations. Even the color of his skin was a good mix of what most people have in Kei's no Kuni, Hai no Kuni, and Tsuchi no Kuni. She could have thought he was from anywhere on this half of the continent if she didn't know he was born and raised in Konoha. "Sorry, Governor, I didn't hear you walk in." "That's fine. I just wanted to see how you were doing," I told him. He looked a little confused. "Really? Why?" She made a funny face, but she could see why he found it strange. He was just one of many wolves, after all, and she was in charge of the normal parts of Nami no Kuni. "I'm not Commander Sai, but in Tsukiyomi's absence, I'm still in charge of Nami no Kuni as a whole. The wolves are just as much a part of Wave as anyone else." "Oh, okay, I see how that works." She smiled and said, "Of course it does. So, how are you feeling? The medics said you didn't take much damage, but they wouldn't keep you here if they didn't have a reason." They both knew the reason, but it was Sai's job to deal with information and management about the wolves. She was going to see them now to see how they were as people. "Pretty good, given the circumstances," he said with a shrug. "Just a little hurting." "That's good to hear, you did well out there." "I got lucky." She gave a head shake. "Even so, you paid attention to what your teammates were doing. If you hadn't, we wouldn't have known anything about the spies." It felt strange to be so far away from the situation when the spies were from Konoha. Before the explosion, they knew for sure that the one they had captured was a Yamanaka. They didn't know for sure that the other 2 were Mindwalkers, but they were almost certainly from Konoha as well. She loved Konoha, but with every day that went by, Nami no Kuni became more and more important to her. She had to think about whether or not she really wanted to go back to Konoha and lead the Inuzuka. She could start a new branch of the clan here in Wave while her brother continued the line in Konohagakure. "You're probably right, but I was such a bad lookout that I didn't even have time to yell." "Theirs didn't either." He smiled in an odd way. "That's true, Governor, but we're supposed to be better than them." "I think you're fine as long as you're the same or better than them. Please call me Hannah. Save the governor stuff for when I'm doing my job. As governor, you're here now, right? Checking on the people who live in your town and all that, right?" "I guess that's true, but I still prefer Hannah. Sai has already taken care of the formal visit as commander, and I'm here for the visit as a concerned boss." "Alright, Hannah-san, I'm Ya too. See, that wasn't so hard, was it?" He laughed. No, it wasn't. Just don't tell the commander, or he'll be mad at me for being so casual with Tsukiyomi Chosen. Sama's." She made a small frown, but it was more out of thought than anger. "You guys really think a lot of him, don't you?" Sai. Yatta joked. "No, he's still short, and he's a terrible money manager. If it weren't for his sister, we'd have gone bankrupt a long time ago." He laughed, but she kept going with her question. "I meant Tsukiyomi-sama. You all seem to look up to him. It's almost like he's your father." "Father figure. Huh." Waito scratched his chin as he thought. "I guess you're right. He is the father of our organization, but he's also been looking out for us as we've grown. I think most leaders have a goal they work toward, but everything he does is usually related to providing for us. That's a pretty good quality for a leader to have. That's Tsukiyomi-sama, the best. Oh, really? Yeah, but I guess you come in second place after this. Again, she laughed. I don't mind coming in second place as long as you don't start calling me mom. Hey, I think there's a line of people who want that part, and I'm pretty sure my Sama is at the front of it. You'd have to fight her for it. I think I'm fine, and I don't plan to be a mother in any way for at least 10 more years, she said. No, but I think you could be a good leader for some of the younger wolves. Tsukiyomi-sama does a great job, but he's kind of far away because he's always watching out for us. It would be good for them to have someone else to look up to. Then they will just have to respect me as their older sister. Haha. Governor Hanane-chan, you got it. She gently hit him on the arm and told him to be quiet. Stop arguing with the governor. We're all related to him through Tsukiyomi-san. Hey, I like Tsukiyomi-san. I'll have to tell people about that. Okay, but if he doesn't like it, it's your fault. But what if he does? Of course it's my fault. Ha, you sound just like a wolf. Tsukiyomi-sama made a good choice when she picked you. Her mother had always told her that an Inuzuka had two families, bloodkin and pack, and that you couldn't choose your bloodkin, but you could choose your pack. In this case, though, the pack chose her, and she didn't feel the least bit sorry about being part of it. Now, if she could only find a way to bring the two together.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.